In February 2023, I celebrated my 30th birthday with my friends and family. It's a big milestone, and in the 12 months leading up to it, I was asked time and time again how I felt about turning 30. My answer was always very similar. I was really excited for the next chapter, and I was looking forward to what was to come. I made some calamitous mistakes in my life so far, but hopefully the lessons I've learned will help me avoid making quite as many big ones again in the future. And this is my story. So today's episode was sparked off an email that I received last week. And it was from a young gymnast. He's 20 years old, and he basically told me that as he was a teenager, he came across my videos on YouTube. He started following my story, and he was really inspired and motivated, especially during the lockdown, to keep working hard and training. And he would listen to the messages in my YouTube videos, and that would inspire him. And he was quite interesting. He said that when he would find training tough and he was finding it difficult, he would watch my videos again and again and again. And he was telling me he'd watched the video about my diet, and he got his mum to start copying my diet. It's really weird because when you sit in a room like this or you make a YouTube video, you forget there's somebody else on the other side of the screen that's listening and taking some of that stuff on board. It was quite ironic, really, because I've sat in this podcast room before and talked about how I read Johnny Wilkinson's book when I was a teenager, and listened to him on a podcast years later, and he spoke about how he felt guilty that he had told loads of young teenagers to, stay behind and train longer than everybody else, be first one into the gym, and actually now he kind of thinks that was the wrong way of going about it, and I kind of feel a little bit similar. But the cool thing about this email was that it went on to say that, now that the podcast has come out, it's been great for him to see how I've reflected on my career and thought about maybe the mistakes I made and how I would do it differently, and he's really enjoying the podcast. And the amazing thing was that he kind of achieved his goal, and last year he went to the World Championships. He's from Denmark, and he won a silver medal. Amazing. So really cool email to receive, and that kind of sparked the inspiration for today's video. And I always thought about, turning 30 and what that meant, and some of the life lessons I've learned and the big mistakes I've made, and how I've used those to kind of almost build the framework and the foundations of my life that I want to go on to lead in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, hopefully 50 years. And I guess the first and most important thing, and the one thing I think that is, for me, is completely fundamental to my life, is it's always the right thing to do the right thing. And I was very lucky when I was a kid that I had two people in my dad and my coach Sergey that really instilled in me, the right morals, ethics, principles, and really taught me right from wrong. And when I think back to when I was a kid, I'm probably similar to a lot of people of my generation. Like, I wasn't really very scared of my mum. I could usually kind of get away with murder, and I used to have this cheeky smile that used to get me out of trouble a lot. But when my mum used to say, you wait till your dad's home, then I'd be scared, because my dad was scary when he wanted to be. He wouldn't shout at me very often, but when he did, you knew you were in trouble. And there was this one story that I remember from when I was a kid, and I was playing for Notts County, and they had been raising money. I think they were under a lot of financial pressure at the time, and Notts County actually went into administration a couple of years later, and they were doing a horse racing night to raise money for the academy and the Centre of Excellence. So all the parents had gone along, and all the kids, and it was great. It was on like a Friday evening, and what they'd done is they'd put like old horse racing videos on a projector, and they had basically a betting system going on, where you would go and put like £1 or £2 in, and you get like a different number, like bet slip for a different horse. You'd say, right, I want horse 7 to win race 1, and you put £2 on it. And I was like 9 years old at this time. And so the evening started getting away, and all the kids are like running around playing football and stuff in the hallways and that. Dead cool, everyone's having a great time. And by the time it had got to like maybe race 10, I'd figured out that the coloured slips they were using for all the races, they'd basically ran out of colours, and they'd gone back to the first colour again by race 10. So they'd gone back to pink slips. So I went round all the tables, climbing under the tables of all the adults and taking all the old pink slips from race 1. And I went to hand them in when the race had come to the end. And I had all these pink slips, and the horse had won with these numbers. So I've gone in with the pink slips from race 1, horse number, let's say 7, handed them in, and they gave me like 25 quid in pound coins. So I've taken my loot, and like when I've handed these slips in, the person's looked at me like, this 9-year-old kid just won 25 quid, and none of these adults can win any money. So I've like hauled all my money together like this, put it in my pockets, stuffed my pockets, ran off to the toilet, hid in the toilet, closed the cubicle, and I'm just counting all of these pound coins in my hand like this. And my dad's head just comes over the top of the cubicle, and he goes, "What have you done?" And I looked at him like, "I've done nothing." And he went, "Right, get out of here right now. Give me that money. You're going to go and apologise to every single coach and adult in that room." And I had to go round to everyone on the desk that was taking in the bets, and every adult and every coach from every age group, and apologise for what I'd done. And I think that's pretty clever. A 9-year-old to work that out, and none of the adults worked it out. I think it was pretty smart. So I think my dad probably had an inkling that he's probably going to go places having a brain like that. But he was right, it was the wrong thing to do. And he made me go and apologise to everybody. And I was petrified, I was so embarrassed and I was scared. But I never did that again. And my dad was brilliant for that when I was a kid. And I think, I learned that as I was growing up. And whenever I made big mistakes, my dad or Sergey was right there to kind of point me back in the right direction and tell me why I'd made a mistake and why I'd done the wrong thing. And, you have to be careful because I've explained before on the podcast, I kind of see the world in very black and white, and it's not always like that, But I think there's that gut feeling that everybody has when they've made a mistake or done something wrong and they know they need to apologise. Like, you can't avoid that gut feeling you've got in your stomach, that lump in your throat. When you've done something wrong. So, yeah, for me, that is super important. And I guess the time that I really, put this into practice, and when I look back now, I was 20 years old, and this really it was almost like a fork in the road, and I made a real big decision, and it was at the World Championships in 2013. So earlier in that year, I'd made history. I'd gone to the European Championships. I'd won a silver medal for the first time on high bar. Amazing. Everything's going to plan. And going into that World Championships, I was trying to qualify as an all-rounder. I didn't quite work in the qualifying events, and I hadn't done great on high bar in the qualifying events either. Now, I had been selected to represent Great Britain on floor because I had won the trials. I think I'd scored a really big score, like a 15-6, 15-7. So I was going to go to the World Championships to represent Great Britain on the floor because it was just an individual championships. But I really wanted to do high bar as well, and nobody had really done well on high bar. And at the time, you had myself, Ashley Watson and Christian Thomas, who were really good on high bar. And what they did was they decided in the 2 weeks build-up to the World Championships, they were going to have a head-to-head, a three-way head-to-head between me, Ashley and Christian to decide who was going to do high bar. So in the first week, I think maybe Ashley won the first one, Christian won the second one, and I won the third one. I think that's the way it went. And then in the second week, we were going to do 3 more days of competition, all going head-to-head. And in the second week, I won all 3. Or I drew 1 and won 2. So I think by the time we'd got to the end of that second week, Christian had actually won the technical real trials, and we were level 3 and 3. But I was really improving, my routine was getting better and better. And I felt like if we had another competition, I'd take the win and I'd go 4-3. I'm sure Christian probably felt the same. And basically at the end of that week, they couldn't decide what to do. They decided that Ash wasn't in the mix. It was between me and Chris. They sat us down on the tumble track in the other gym. We sat down. National coach said, look, we can't decide the team. We don't know what to do. We can come back on Monday and we can do this one more time if you want to. Sergey pretty much said, yes, that's what we want to do. I think Chris kind of said he was happy to do that. And in that moment, it was a big moment because it's really hard to go against the people closest to you sometimes. And I just felt like, do you know what? Christian had won the technical World Championships trials, and he was level with me. And actually, he deserves that place because he got the scores. And so I piped up and I said, actually, I think Christian should go and perform on high bar. He won the first trials. We're level, at Lilleshall. I think he deserves it. And the national coach said, well, Christian, are you happy with that? And Christian said, yeah, I mean, if you're sure. And I said, yeah, you deserve it, mate. You should go and do it. And God, the wrath of Sergey for the next 48 hours, he didn't speak to me for the next week. And he said, like, you never do that. Like, you have to fight for your place till the very end. And I just said, look, Sergey, it wasn't the right thing. Like, he earned it. He got the scores at the proper trials. I didn't. He should go and do high bar. Now, you know, that was a moment that I look back on, and I still, like, throughout my career, I would flip back and forth to whether, you know, should I have been a little bit more ruthless and thought about myself and focused on me? But actually, I wouldn't change that. Like, I'm so proud that in that moment at 20 years old, I did that, even though I knew Sergey was going to go absolutely ballistic. And he did. But he forgave me, and I think in time he began to respect that decision. But it taught me that experience that it is always the right thing to do the right thing. And for me, that has become like the framework, like I said, of of my life now, you know. You always know if you've done something wrong. You can't kid yourself. Like when you stand in front of that mirror, if something's off in your life, you know, you've got to try and put that right. And I always believe that it's better to do it straight away. Sometimes it, you know, takes me a bit of time, and I am an imperfect man in an imperfect world, and I make mistakes all the time, you know. It's important that you hold your hands up and you try and learn, and you don't make that mistake again. And that moves me on to the second thing I think that it has been a massive learning curve for me, and it's making mistakes. You've got to make mistakes. That's what life is all about. And if I'm the same person in 5 years' time, so at 35, if I look back and I'm the same person that I am today, like, I'm doing something wrong. You've got to make mistakes. And like, I play football now on a Saturday morning, and like, one thing I always say to myself is, the more I miss, the more I'll score. And it's super important, because it's so easy in life to like not take any action, to like not risk something, not ask for that promotion at work, or not try that new sport, not ask somebody out on a date. Like that, they're hard things to do. But if you never try it, you're never going to know. And at 20 years old, you know, I thought I had it all figured out at 20 years old. You know, I'd just been to, like I said, I'd been to the Olympics, I had an Olympic medal, I had sponsors like Red Bull, Sky. I was, you know, my plan was to go to the World Championships that year, try and be an all-rounder. Then I was going to go to the World Championships a year after, win a medal, win a Commonwealth gold medal, go to Rio, win a gold medal. I wanted to be the first ever Nike athlete for gymnastics. I wanted to have all of these things, you know, and have this incredibly illustrious career. But life doesn't work like that. And 5 years later, at 25, I was completely lost, man. You know, that person at 20 years old that thought he had it all figured out, I realised, God, he knew nothing. He didn't know what he was talking about. And at 25, yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand myself. I didn't understand the world around me. My gymnastics wasn't going well, and I was a completely lost person. And I almost went on this quest of going around and asking these big questions about life, you know. All of a sudden, I wanted to know, what is this all about? Like, why am I here? Like, what's the purpose? Why am I doing gymnastics? Like, I'm literally doing complicated cartwheels, like, for a living, and it's not that important. I don't understand what this is all about. Why are all these people in my world? Why do they literally, gymnastics is their life and it's the be all and end all? And I was like, this can't be right. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. I couldn't compute all of that. And I can remember going to visit my uncle. My uncle was a really interesting guy. My dad's brother, like, he's lived like a very different life. He's a musician, a creative, he traveled. And I can remember going, and, you know, he's become a dad like very, very much like later in his life. You know, he was around 50 when he became a dad for the first time. And I can remember like walking around the park with him and saying, like, Uncle Mitch, I'm really struggling. Like, I'm not in a good place. You know, I think I'm depressed. I don't know what to do with my life. And like, what is the meaning of all this? Like, I was asking somebody else. There's so much pressure, right? Like, tell me, give me the answers. I want to know what it is. And, you know, he said, I don't know, Sam, I can't tell you that. You have to figure that out for yourself. And I went, like I said, on this journey of almost self-discovery. And what I did was, I had woke up one morning and I decided I'm going to fly to Barcelona tomorrow. Dead randomly. And I was living with my grandparents at the time, and I was like, I'm gonna go to Barcelona because, like, I just need to get away. I need to get away and be on my own and try and figure this stuff out. So I booked a flight to Barcelona. I didn't tell my mom. I actually only texted my mom when I got there because I thought she'll probably want to know that I'm safe and that I am in Barcelona. So I messaged her when I got there. I told my grandparents and they kind of went, oh, okay, that's interesting, Sam. They were just like, what are you doing? And so I just flew to Barcelona the next day on my own, turned up at 9 o'clock in the evening, had nowhere to stay. And I just basically got a train from the airport into the centre of the town and walked around and tried to find like a hostel to stay in. And I found this hostel and it was like a shared dorm. And I went in there and like didn't get any sleep because people were coming in and out all night. It was like a weird little like, almost like a cubicle you'd get on a spaceship. I was lying on this thing and for 4 days, I wandered around Barcelona. I went to the new camp. I sat in restaurants. I went to the Sagrada Familia, all on my own. And the only people I spoke to in 4 days was the receptionist at the hotel, the people that worked in the restaurants when I ordered the food, and literally like the airport attendants. I didn't speak to anybody. It was really weird. And I'd sit there in the square in the middle of Barcelona just watching people. It was really odd. And like, obviously I know now that at that point I was depressed and, you know, I was struggling and I was lost. And I think that does say a lot. I just felt like I needed to get away, you know, to figure out what the hell I was going to do. And, you know, I think that's a clear representation that I was, you know, not in a great place and I didn't know what I was doing and I was just trying to figure things out and force things to happen and make sense to me. But when I got back, what I did do was go to the gym and had that conversation with Sergey and a guy called Jonathan and said, Sergey, I don't know what's going on, but it isn't working and I've got to switch something up here because I'm not happy. I don't feel well. Training's not going good. I'm not even sure why I'm doing this anymore. And yeah, I went on like that journey of self-discovery over the next 5 years, and that brings me to where I am right now, I guess at 30. And again, I've kind of come full circle. And now I'm like, yeah, I feel like I've all got it figured out again, but I'm wise enough to know that I haven't. And, you know, I'm going to make a lot of mistakes in the next 5 years, and that's okay. Like, that's your job. Like, my job is to learn. I now have this like sense of curiosity, and like, if I make a mistake, I'm curious about it. I'm like, oh, why did I do that? Like, what could I change? How can I avoid that next time? Rather than like making a mistake and being like, Sam, you're rubbish. Like, why did you do that? Stupid. You can't make mistakes like that again. Like, it doesn't work. And we live in like a world now, especially I feel like my generation and my brothers and sisters' generations, where everyone's so scared of making mistakes, like petrified. So they just don't go and do anything or take any action. Like, you can't do that. Like, you've got to stick your neck out. Like, that's the only way you learn, and it's the only way you really get anywhere in life. And I think that's really important that you understand, like, you're supposed to make mistakes, like, mess up. It's super important. You just have to learn and try and do your best to not make that same mistake again. And the really, really switched on people, they learn from other people's mistakes. They watch the people around them and the moves they're making and, you know, the things they do well, maybe not so well, and they try to learn from that, and they learn from their life experience. But yeah, for me, making mistakes is just part of life. You've got to do it. And the more comfortable you get with putting yourself out there, taking a risk and making a mistake, I think the further you get, you know, super important for me. And I guess that moves on to the next one after we spoke about me spending my time wandering around Barcelona on my own, looking for the answers. You've got to be your own best friend. This one's been huge. Because I spend a lot of time on my own. I always have, and I feel like I probably will my whole life. You know, I like creating my own thing and building my own thing. I like to be in charge of my narrative and what I'm doing, and I'm starting to build my own gymnastics coaching company. And, you know, I go into schools and I do the podcast with Sam and we make YouTube videos. But a lot of the time I'm on my own. And that's really important, like, that I'm able to be on my own, because it's great. I do my best thinking when I'm alone in my car and the world is on the outside. It's just me, my car, and I do my best thinking there and I come up with my best ideas. And it's the same in the sauna when I'm by myself and it's quiet and I close my eyes and I think of things, or I'm in the shower. But I also realize that being on my own, for me, it's not always the best thing, and it's not the most healthy thing. I need to be around people, you know. I need people that can bring me up and tell me, like Sam does sometimes, you're doing a good job, man, keep going. Because it's really hard. I think it's hard as well as like a young person, regardless, but also young men. As you get older, there's not a lot of people that ever tell you, you're doing well, mate, keep going, like, you're right on track. Like, that's hard, getting that feedback from the world. And like, like I said, I can spend a lot of time by myself. So making sure that that conversation that I have with myself upstairs is a positive one. You know, when I was a kid, it was always, I'd swear at myself and belittle myself and tell myself I'm stupid. And every now and then, Connie has to correct me because I'll do something stupid and then I'll be shouting at myself in my head, but I'll say it out loud and she'll say, don't talk to yourself like that. And she's right, you shouldn't, you know. You should never talk to yourself. You should talk to yourself in the same way you'd talk to your best friend. I think that's really important, and learning that at the end of my career was massive. But now as I go into working life, it's going to be huge because there's going to be the doubts that come into my brain all of the time. Like, am I doing the right thing? You know, like, I don't know how to do this. How do I figure this out? Who do I go to? I'm on my own. Who's going to help me? Like, I've got to be able to be my own best friend. That's super, super important. So being your own best friend and making sure that conversation that exists upstairs is a positive one is massive. You know, switching it around, switch that language from, I can't do this to, I think you can do this, mate. Or, what happens if I make a mistake? If we make a mistake, we'll learn from it so we don't get it wrong the next time. Like, just a small little switch in the way you talk to yourself is super important because your brain will always lean towards being negative or pessimistic, you know, or skeptical. So if you can just do that, it will make a huge, huge difference. And I guess the next big one that I really learned, particularly in my gymnastics career and competing in elite level sport, is that pressure reveals character. This was massive. And when I say that word character, anybody that ever trained with Sergey when they were a kid will 100% remember when he used to say this, because this was the worst thing anybody could ever say to me when I was younger. And Sergey would say, you have no character. And he'd say it like that because he'd struggle pronouncing, but he'd say, you have no character. I'd be like, what's he talking about? And like in the beginning, none of us knew what it meant, because the funny thing with Sergey was when he first came over, he couldn't speak any English. But because we grew up with him, we knew exactly what he was saying just from his hand signals, and like he slowly started to speak English, but we were kids, so we couldn't correct his pronunciation, but he'd say this. And you know, if he said that to my mum, she'd be like, what? That doesn't mean anything. It just means it's like nothing. But to me, or to the boys in our group, that was like the biggest diss he could ever give us, was you've got no character. And what he meant was like, there's no resilience, you've got no strength. Like, if times get tough, you give up. And, oh, God, the times he used to say that to me, I'd think, you don't say that about me. I've got so much character, and I knew what he was doing. It was that reverse psychology. He knew if he said that to me, it'd get me so wound up, I'd switch it on, and then I'd be on it for the rest of the session, you know? And it's important, because when I look back at probably the one competition where I observed, it would have been a dream for a psychologist to have been part of our World Championships 2011 team in Tokyo, just to witness how everybody behaved, because we were under extreme pressure. And the year before, we'd been to the World Championships in 2010. We'd come fourth in the qualifying. I'd been the reserve year, best result we'd ever had. So it was nailed on that we were going to go to the World Championships in 2011 and we were going to qualify for the Olympic Games. Now, the stuff, it was just fascinating, like, for me to see how people reacted under pressure. And I was just 18, so I went into this competition, I had a broken collarbone, you know, I was forcing myself to compete. The coaches wanted me to compete because, you know, we wanted the best result for Great Britain, we wanted to qualify that Olympic team. And, you know, I was very injured, in a lot of pain, and the coaches had decided that going into that competition, they couldn't pick the last member of the team. It was between me and Max. I've told this story before. We did that control competition. And right from the get-go, you could tell that the coaches were under pressure, because one of the most bizarre situations that I ever experienced that blew my mind, I couldn't fathom what was going on, was I think it was about the second training session in Japan. They lined us up, and you always line up before your training session in gymnastics from a very young age, from 7 years old right up until you're a grown man and you're at the Olympic Games. You line up, the coach tells you what the program is for that session, you know, the key things he wants everybody to work on, maybe like gives you a bit of a motivational speech, a bit of a talk, try and get us all going. And they just started going mental because I was wearing boxer shorts. And I was looking down the line at everyone else like, is this for real? And they were properly angry that I had worn my gym shorts, and gymnastic shorts are pretty short anyway, right? And I just wore boxer shorts because I didn't wear like tighty whitey pants. I wore boxer shorts, and I'd worn them and they would like stick out the bottom of my shorts. And so I'm standing there and they're going, it's so unprofessional, your boxer shorts, you've got to go to the shop and buy some pants. All the other countries complaining, saying that it's going to be a bad example and all of their young gymnasts going to start wearing boxer shorts. And I'm literally looking to the left and to the right of me at my teammates, and they're all kind of looking a bit puzzled. And I'm thinking, really? Like, this is the World Championships. We're trying to qualify ourselves a team for the Olympic Games. I've got a broken collarbone. I'm struggling to even chalk my hands up, and I'm being told off for wearing boxer shorts. Like, what has that got to do with my ability to perform my routines? It made no sense to me. But it just, when I look back now, I go, that's pressure. That is being under extreme pressure. People do crazy things and they act emotionally. And in that situation, I learned so much. And actually in that competition, I was the youngest member of the team. On the first apparatus, I tore my pec off. I had a broken collarbone and I didn't do that badly. I made some big mistakes and I had big deductions. So on high bar, I went the wrong way. On floor, I did a wide arm and fell down. So it's effectively a fall, but I didn't fall off the apparatus in my first ever World Championships. And I'd been told the night before, Sam, don't worry. All the older guys are going to go through their routines. We'll qualify for the Olympic Games. It'll all be fine. You don't need to stress. You're just going to get a good dose of experience at this competition. We're standing there. I'm literally stood to walk up to do the pommel horse routine at the World Championships. On our last piece of apparatus, we know that we're under the cosh and we're probably not going to qualify. Christian's just had a mistake on the pommel. He walks up, he stands at the top of the steps, puts his hands on his head like this. I'm stood at the bottom of the steps like, it literally feels like I'm walking to the guillotine. I walk up the steps, then the computer breaks for the judge, and I'm stood there for 15 minutes, and I'm 18 with a broken collarbone, a tore pec. I've got to do a pommel routine to try and keep us in the race to qualify for the Olympic Games. I'm stood there for 15 minutes. I'm doing everything in my power to keep calm, not stress. I chalk my hands up. I try and have a look at Sergey in the audience. I find him. He's just going, Sam, keep calm like this. Chalk your hands up. I walk over, chalk up. I think I probably chalk up 4 or 5 times. And after the 15 minutes, I put my hand up and I go through my routine. And the amazing thing was that I did a skill on the one handle. It's like a full Russian to the middle. You do 2 circles on the one handle, a 1.5 Russian, and you land in the middle. I did this 1.5 Russian, and instead of stepping my hand here to push into the 2 handles, I put it on the lever. I stepped over the handle on the lever with my other hand and then stepped back onto the handles. I'd never, ever done that in my life, and I went through the pommel routine. So for me, what an experience that was to see people and react under extreme stress and pressure. What a learning experience. And that experience really did set us up for 2012. And if we hadn't have been through that, who knows how we would have reacted in that Olympic team final when I made my mistake on high bar. It was because we'd been in that situation 6 months before, and we'd made so many mistakes that we made a lot of adjustments and put things right. So, that just goes back to the making mistakes. It's super important. It's part of life, right? But you've got to learn from them. We did that, and 6 months later, we've gone from 10th to the 3rd best team in the world. So, pressure reveals character. And it does. You see the very best in people. I always knew, I wanted to make sure that when I go up to compete, and the best competition to ever watch in gymnastics on TV is a team final. Whether it's the men or the women, it's the best thing to watch. If anybody listening has never watched gymnastics, make sure when it's the World Championships this year, Olympic Games next year, you watch the men's and women's team final, because it's unbelievable, the atmosphere. Because when you walk up to that podium to put your hand up, you've not just got your life's dream and your life's work and all the people in your little team behind you. You've got every single one of them lads sat on that chair. Their 15 years and their 6 hours a day, 6 days a week that they've put in for this moment is on your shoulders. It must be like taking a penalty. So you want to make sure that when you stood in that line in front of the judges, when you look to your left and you look to your right, you know that the guy either side of you, if shit hits the fan, he's going to be there no matter what. So yeah, for me, being in those situations in a team final or being with those guys and Christian stepping up after I fell at the Olympic Games on high bar and smashing his routine, like, oh, unbelievable. And we have a bond, you know, that we'll share forever. And those lads, I know that I can ring them up any day of the week if I'm in trouble and I've got a problem, and they'll be there like that, you know, and pressure and stress, and that reveals character. It's awesome. Like, I always look for those situations in life. Like, it's easy to do things when, you know, when the sun's shining and everything's going right, you know, and you're getting green lights on the traffic lights and everything's perfect. That's easy. Life's easy then. It's when it's tough, man. That's when you really see the very best and the very worst in people. And I love those situations when your back's against the wall, you know. And going back to 2003, when, you know, earlier I spoke about Johnny Wilkinson. There's 30 seconds left on the clock. He's got to hit a drop kick. Like, what can you do under pressure? Like, I love that. So for me, yeah, that pressure really reveals character. Yeah, amazing. And I'd learned that, you know, I've had an experience recently where, you know, my best friends in the world, my granddad passed away, and everybody I think in my life they were very worried with how I was going to handle it. And don't get me wrong, it was hard, man. It was like really tough. But I decided that I had read a book about a year ago. It's called The 12 Rules of Life by Jordan Peterson. And there's some good stuff in it, you know. When I read books, I like to kind of like take the bits that work for me, you know. I don't like treat it as gospel because not everybody knows everything. But there was one bit in it and it talked about how being like somebody at a funeral that you could depend on and everybody else could lean on is like a really good thing to aspire to be. And I was like, that makes so much sense, you know. And I knew that my granddad's like death was coming at some point. I'd had a long time to prepare for this. And when it did happen, like on his 80th birthday, my granddad, I had a big birthday party and it was amazing. And all the family were there. All the people that loved him the most were there in a room, and it was brilliant. And I got asked to talk at his 80th birthday, and I said, no. Because like I'm the person, I'm doing this, right? I like to talk, you know, I could talk for England. So people just expect, oh, Sam will do that. He will do that speech. And I said, no, that's not my job, you know. Like leave that to someone else. That's maybe for my dad or my uncle. And afterwards, I regretted it. I thought, oh, no, I should have spoke, you know, like, because that's something I'm good at. That's like what I can bring to the table. And I always said to myself, like, the next time I get asked to do that, I'm going to do it, because I felt like being able to talk at my granddad's funeral was a really good thing that I could do for everybody else. It was like one thing that I'm good at that I could bring to the table. And so this time round, when my grandma asked me, Sam, will you speak at the funeral? I said, yeah, I'll do it. You know, don't get me wrong, it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It was tough, but I was so proud that I was able to do that. And in the end, you know, it was just me talking to him, and it was an incredible day. It was brilliant. But I'd learned then, yeah, like, for me, in those moments when the pressure's on, I'm quite an emotional person. So, like, normally, I remember my dad, like, I think he split his head open or cut his finger washing the pots, like, doing it, like, with a knife. Probably about, like, 6 or 7 years ago. And I heard him, like, scream. And I walked in and I saw the blood and I went, that's not for me. I'm not going to help it. And I walked straight out and I sent in my sister and Jack to sort it out. So I'd like to think now, like, I've got to the place where I'm like, do you know what? Crisis situation, I'm going to be okay. I can pull the emotion out of it and, like, act with logic and stuff. And I think in those situations, you really do see the very best in people. And, you know, I like to think that everybody's got that within them. You know, if they're really pushed, yeah, that pressure, that situation reveals the best of someone's character. And I guess the next one that I come on to, and I guess talking about my granddad, like, is that, and this one's super important, and I really believe in this, is that, like, time is the most precious thing that I own. It is. Like, forget the money and everything else. Like, being able to give people your time is huge. And I remember being 17. And this is the first experience in my life, I think, where, like, witnessing time play out really hit me with how quickly it goes and how, like, our time here is, like, finite. It's, you know, it's not going to last forever. And I was 17. I was at my first World Championships, and I got put in a bedroom with the oldest guy in the team. So I shared a room with a guy called Ruslan. Incredible gymnast. Like, he was unbelievable. And I guess when I talk about time as well, like, that was his first ever major championships at 27. He'd come from Ukraine, I think, in the very early 2000s, and he'd waited 10 years to get his citizenship. So for 10 years, he had to sit on the sideline and watch everybody else go out and compete, even though he knew that his gymnastics was most of the time more difficult, more technically sound. It was more beautiful for sure, because he was an incredible gymnast. But he had to just watch time and time again for 10 years, man. He had to wait for his moment. And in 2010, he gets to the World Championships. And I'm sat there in a room with him, and I'm thinking, this guy's so old, man. I'm 17. Like, I am not going to be doing this at 27. What's he doing? Like, I can't believe it. I just couldn't fathom, like, gymnastics at 27. Like, I just couldn't understand that. And I was in a room with him, and it's a funny story, actually, because the physio came in. TV was on, me and Ruslan are sat there watching TV, and Jurassic Park's on. The physio comes in and he's brought the ice machine with him. And he's like, oh, what are you watching? We're like, oh, Jurassic Park, watching Jurassic Park. And he goes, oh, great. And he's like stood there like leaning in, like watching it for a couple of minutes. And he goes, oh, which one is it? And Ruslan goes, it's the third one. And I look at him, and we've literally watched like an hour of this film. And I went, it's the first one. What are you talking about? And he's like, no. The graphics are too good. This is the third one. I was like, what? There's no way. This is definitely the first one. And we had this big argument about it. And I look back now, and it's just that time makes me laugh. But I really realised at that moment, because I was stood there going, I'm never going to be doing gymnastics at 27. And literally, I woke up one day and I was there. I was 27. It was 2020. We were in the pandemic. And even more ridiculously, I was in my mum and dad's back garden lifting plant pots, trying to do gymnastics still, to do one more competition. And I was 27 years old, and it had gone like this, and that kid at 20 that thought that he was going to go to the next 2 or 3 Olympic Games, he was going to be a world champion, have all these sponsors. Like, time just goes, man. It moves so fast. And I remember sitting there one morning with my granddad when I used to live with him. And we were probably watching a John Wayne film on a morning. And I sat in the chair, and I used to swing on his chair because he was on the sofa. I had my chair. I'd just made a coffee, I think. And I just said to him out of the blue, we were quiet for a while, and I said, Grandpa, does it get faster? And he said, what do you mean, Sam? And I said, time, as you get older, like, does it start to go quicker and quicker? And he said, yes, mate. He was like, you got to make sure you make the most of it. And I was like, because it's not very often you like get a lot of time with people that, like your grandparents, you might see them for like, you might see your family and have those surface conversations. How you doing? How's work? Like, how's things? But like, I spent real time, quality time with my granddad. Like, and I got to ask him some of the big questions, and he was never shy of them as well. Like, if you ever have the opportunity, if your grandparents are in your life, spend time with them, talk to them, and ask them anything, because they'll tell you, because they're at the end of their life. They got nothing to hide. They'll tell you the truth, And I sat there and I asked him that, and he told me, and I thought, wow, that's big, I knew that one day that's going to be me sat in that sofa, and I'm going to be at the end of my life, and I don't want to look back and have any regrets, He had an amazing life, and yeah, asking him those questions for me was amazing. That time that I spent with him towards the end, and one day I said, Grandpa, next week you're going to show me where you grew up. And so I put him in the car, and we drove down Lings Lane, because my granddad's dad, they used to own Wembley Farm. It was a big farm in Keyworth, and they had lots of the farms in the surrounding villages. And he drove me down there. He's never took me before. And we pulled over at the side of the road, and he's showing me the farmhouse where he was born and where he grew up. And then we go down to the bottom of the hill, and he's showing me this field where his mum used to put him in a box while she worked the fields during the war. And he's telling me these stories, and he's wandering across the road, and I'm trying to shield him from cars and stuff. And it's raining, and we're in this field, and he's not well. And his face is just lit up telling me these stories. And he says, that stream there, mate, I used to go fishing with my dad there, and we used to tickle trout. And so I've done a double take and gone, you used to what? Go tickle trout. I was like, what's that? I was laughing my head off, because my granddad's famous for his one-liners and his euphemisms and stuff. But I didn't know what tickling trout was. And he said, well, you stand in the river, and the trout come along, and you tickle them, and it puts them into a daze, and you catch them. And I was like, what? That's amazing. And so he told me this story of when he was a kid, and then he's gone to, and I said to him, Granddad, I want you to show me where my great-grandparents were buried. And he was like, oh, right. Okay. And he was like, well, they're at Weissel Church. And he was dead angry that they'd been buried at Wyesel Church, which is the next village, because he wanted them to be buried in Keyworth. And he'd fell out with one of his siblings about it. And he took me there, and we walked through, and Connie was with us as well, amazingly, so which was really cool. And we walked through there. I said, where are they buried? And he didn't know where the headstones were. He said, I've not been back since my mum was buried. And I said, what? What do you mean? And he said, I've not been back. And so we had to wander around this graveyard looking for the headstones of my great-grandparents, and he found them. I said, Grandad, you need to come back here every single week and tell them about your life and tell them what you've been up to, you know? And he was like, that's a good idea, Sam. I'm going to do that. And so that just made me realise, like, I think she had passed away in 1992, the year before I was born, and he'd not been back to that graveyard in so long. Like, time is so precious, man. You've got to, you know, you fall out with your family and your friends, you've got to put that right, because it goes like this. And yeah, that for me was massive. That time I spent with my granddad, I really, you know, now I put a massive emphasis on making sure that I give people time, especially like my family and my loved ones, and I protect it as well. You got to be careful with your time. You can't just give it away and spend time doing the things you don't want to do that doesn't make you happy, you know? That's really, really important. And, you know, I spend a lot of time now like talking to, I talk to a lot of dads now. I know that the next chapter of my life, I really hope that one day I'm going to become a dad. So I spend a lot of time asking dads, like, if you were going to give me one piece of advice, what would it be? And it normally all comes around to this inkling I've got that it's time. Being able to give your kids time and give people time is super important. It's the most precious gift you can give anybody, spending time with them, man. And yeah, so in my life now, I try to do that. Like, I'm not very good. All of my friends will know this. My brother will tell you this. I'm not very good with technology. I'm just not bothered about it. But you get me in a room, face to face, I come alive, and I'm here. You've got me. For the next hour, if we go for a coffee, I'm with you, you know? Like, giving people that time is super important to me. So yeah, the time one was massive, and, you know, I'm glad that I got to speak about Ruslan, because, again, this really hits home. You know, I was traveling at Christmas, and I don't know the nature of the circumstances that led to him getting to this point in his life, but I found out the news at Christmas while I was traveling that he had taken his own life, and, you know, that's really sad. It really upset me. I spent a lot of time with him. Like I said, I lost contact with him after 2012, you know. It was a difficult time. That was his dream, to go to the Olympics. And in many ways, I was probably the guy that was in the spot he would have had if it wasn't me. I know that he found that difficult, but I had so much admiration for him, his gymnastics, his work ethic. I mean, honestly, if you ever get the chance, go on YouTube, type his name in. He did some incredible gymnastics. He was way ahead of his time, man. Some of the stuff he was doing was unbelievable. And for me, God, I'm so grateful that I got to witness his gymnastics every day, because that pushed me on to new levels. But yeah, it was really sad, and it just hits home, you know. You never know. Life can just take a turn like that. You never know what it could be. So you've got to really make the most of it. And yeah. You know, I hope he's at peace now. I don't know the nature of what led to him getting to that point in his life, but, you know, yeah, that when I heard that, it really hit home just how precious this life is. And, you know, he was an incredible gymnast. He was amazing for my career, and yeah, I've got a lot of admiration for what he did. And yeah, like I said, hopefully he's at peace now. And that comes on again to, you know, talking about him, what a great role model he was for me in the gym at that time in my life. Life is a people game. It is. You know, those old sayings you hear that it's not what you know, it's who you know. And, you know, it's not your network is your net worth. It's true. It's important. Like, the way you treat people is super important, because it comes back around. And, you know, for me, I learned that through sport. I've learned that as I've retired. I've learned that in my worst moments when, you know, I was struggling, the people that were there to help me, support me, like, it's been huge. And going back to the great people in my life, like Sergey. 2 weeks ago, he had his leaving due at Nottingham, and I messaged a load of the guys that Sergey's coached over the past 20 years. You know, one of the lads drove up from Cornwall for 6 hours just to see him, to say thank you for what you did to my life. You had a real positive impact on me. And there was a group of us, about 15 of us there, and he couldn't believe it, man. It was a magical moment. Like, I didn't know how many people would come, and we'd walked in, and we're all adults now, and we've gone on to lead different lives, and it was amazing catching up with everyone. And we walked into that gym, and everyone, all these people, they'd not been there for 5 years, 10 years. They all say, oh my God, it's not changed. It's the same. Like, the gym's still the same. And I was like, yeah, we'll never change. Like, it'll always be the same. And we walked in, and he was on the high. The best thing was when we got in there, he was doing his thing on the high bar. He was sliding the pad in. He had a big smile on his face, and all the boys over at the high bar, they knew that we were coming to surprise him. And, you know, one of the younger lads in the group had made a big, photo album for him. He didn't know this. And they looked around at the door, and you see all these people, and he turned around, he's smiling, and he just, was so confused, and he made his way down the steps, and he came over to us, and he just hugged everyone, individually. And we were all so proud that we could be there. We were I think everyone knew, this is a cool moment that we've all come back together, and, you know, we're going to acknowledge the positive impact he's had on our lives. And, you know, he did a little talk, and he said, and he cried. I've never seen Sergey cry. I've seen him cry once. I saw him cry when I did my ankle. I saw him cry at the Commonwealth Games, and then he cried his eyes out. I couldn't believe it. I gave him a big hug, and I said, Serg, thank you so much for everything you've done for every single one of us, and the positive impact you've had on so many young people in Nottingham. It's been amazing. We're so proud that you were our coach. And yeah, it was a great evening. We all caught up, talked. One of the lads, the lad that came up from Cornwall, tried to do a somersault into the pit and lost his phone. So we're all looking for his phone in the pit. And Liam's brought over this photo album, and we're all stood around there looking at it. And it was just an amazing evening. Then we went to the pub. We had a drink, and we're catching up with everyone's life, what you've been up to. And it was cool that we've got this common thread and this one positive figure that brought us all together through Sergey, and, you know, seeing that impact that he's had on people. And I've always said that, you can measure someone's life, I think, by how many people turn up to their funeral. And when I went to my granddad's funeral, and we were stood there, and, you know, it was a incredibly difficult day, but it was really a celebration of his life. And me, my dad, my brother, and my uncle, we carried the coffin in, and when we turned the corner and we got into the church, and I saw the amount of people there, and the fact that there were people stood outside that couldn't get in, and the back was lined 7 or 8 people strong, it was just overwhelming. It gave me strength. And, you know, I looked around, I was like, all these people here, this man has had such a positive impact on their life. This is what it's about. It's about giving your time to other people and making a difference and being a positive force. And life really is a people game, and you've got to be very, very careful about how you treat people. Nobody's better than anybody else. When you go into that gym, or you go into your workplace, or whoever you are, the person cleaning the toilets or the person going out there winning the gold medals, everyone's just as important as the other. You treat people equally, and that's massive. That's huge. I always look out for that in people. You know, I want to be around people that are team players, that, you know, super positive role models, but don't think they're better than anybody else. They're the special people, the people I want to be around. Life really is a people game. It is. So make sure that you give people your time, and you treat people with respect, and you just, you know, you be a good person more than anything. Because it's, you know, back in the pandemic, when we all felt like we were in this thing, I'm sure you will have, when we went out for our 1 hour a day of exercise, and you walked around wherever you live, and then all of a sudden people were saying hello to each other. It was amazing. How nice was that, you know? If you walk around the street with a hoodie on normally, no one says hello to you. The older generation, there's not a chance they're going to say hello to you. I like it now. When I walk around Keyworth, I say hello to everyone, just because it's a nice thing to do and it brightens someone's day up. But I see loads of people shocked that I've said hello to them. How easy is that? And even when I was at my very worst and my lowest, and I was struggling with depression, I would still always say hello to people and be nice, because that used to make me feel better as well. So yeah, life is a people game, so never forget that. And I guess when I get round to the last one I'm going to talk about today, and this one is funny because I kind of learnt this through mistakes, and being the opposite of this, and positivity is a choice. It's a choice. It's a decision. Waking up and choosing to be a positive force is 100% a choice. Now, that doesn't mean that whether you're struggling in life or you're going through a difficult time, that you have to pretend that everything's okay. It doesn't mean that, you know. And I used to be I heard a quote a few years ago, and it was, some people light up the room when they walk into it, And some people, when they walk out of the room lights up. And I was like, wow, that's deep. And I was thinking about it, and I used to be that person for a long time that would walk into a room and everyone would go quiet. And I'd suck the energy out of it. I can remember being that. I was pessimistic, negative, skeptical. I always wanted to moan about something. I was kind of being the victim, and like I'd been through some difficult things for sure. But like that stuff is contagious. And I know at 23, I read a book called The Secret. And it's a bit of a wishy-washy book, and it's all about the universe and how you attract things into your life, and it's about vibrations and stuff. And I read this book, and this book became like my Bible for a while, and I thought, I'm going to adopt this because I'm running out of options here. I'm going to do everything I can to make the Olympic Games in 2016. I don't know how the hell I'm going to do it, so I'm going to, live by this book and the law of attraction. And I'd wake up every morning and I'd say, today's going to be a good day. And then I'd go through the things I was going to do in my life, and I'd say what I was grateful for. Like, I'm grateful for, gymnastics, my family, my friends. I'm grateful for football, for Man United. I'd go through these things, and it certainly had an effect. And then those next 6, 7, 8 months, I was flying. The results started coming in. I was competing really well. And then I got a good dose of reality when I didn't make the Olympic Games in 2016. And I had to realize, wow, life isn't fair, which was really important for me to learn, and an important lesson as well. But that positive choice is super important. And after that period, for a very long time, I just became a very negative person. I know that I wasn't a great person to be around. And I'll tell you a story. I look back now and I think, God, what an idiot. I can't believe I did that. But I was so angry that I couldn't put it together, and I was getting older, and, my body couldn't do the things I wanted it to do. And one of my good friends, who was a lot younger than me, a gymnast called Hamish, he used to come and train at Knots sometimes. And this kid's looked up to me since he was 7 years old. And he's in the gym one day, and he's got a football in between apparatus, right? And so he's just moving to the next apparatus. He's got a ball, and he's playing with someone, like kicking the ball around. He's not doing anything wrong. He's got a smile on his face. He's enjoying being in the gym. And I was in such a place at that point where I was just not a good version of myself. And I went, oh, Hamish, pass me the ball. He passed it me, and I just smacked it and walked off. And I know that Hamish went back and he said to my brother, like, oh, Jack, I think I've really upset Sam because, like, this situation happened in the gym. And I remember Jack told me this, and he said to me, like, oh, I just told Hamish, that, like, to you, like, this is everything. Like, you're under so much pressure. You're the hardest worker in the gym. Like, that's what you respect. And I look back now and I think, wow, what a dick. Like, I'd gone up to him, pretended to be excited, and smacked that. But it says a lot about the mindset I was in at that time. And it is a choice. And I would go to training camps and I would spend the time on my own. Instead of playing FIFA with the boys or going to play basketball, I would sit in my room on my own, dwelling on all the negatives in my life rather than thinking about the positives. And because there were so many positives at that time. I was still being funded. I had an amazing coach, amazing teammates, brilliant friends, a good family, but I was choosing to focus on the negatives and the things that had happened to me that were out of my control. So yeah, learning that and reading that book. And then I'll tell you one funny story because, I do believe in the law of attraction in the universe and what you put out there. Positive energy attracts positive energy. I do believe in that massively. And there is a line, right? Because you don't want to be delusionally positive. You've got to be realistic. But I'd much rather go through my life choosing to believe in what could happen and the positives than thinking it's going to go wrong. I'm going to mess up. This is going to be a nightmare. Because everyone will have those people in their life that every year they're like, oh, I wonder if this year is going to be as unlucky as last year. And that drains you, man. Like, it weighs you down. I don't want to be that person. I want to be a positive person, like in my life. I know there's people in my life, like one of my best friends, Andy, or my little sister, Isabel, or my granddad, Arthur, or my dad, like, that bring people, like, they make people feel happy. Just being in the room, you're like, oh yeah, Andy's here, amazing. You just, I spend the whole day laughing. Like, I want to be that positive force for people. And a really cool story that blew my mind was there was a second book. It was like a follow-on book to The Secret that I read. And I never finished it, and I started reading it. And in this one, it had little tasks for you to do. And what I did with this was, I did this. It blew my mind. And then I thought, okay, that stuff works, but it scares me a little bit. And actually, I just want to live my life. And what happened was it said, right, for the next 48 hours, you need to write down an object and you need to convince yourself that you were going to see that object in the next 48 hours. And it can be anything. So I sat there and I'm like reading my book, and it's probably around that point, a bit earlier, where I'm a little bit lost. I'm doing this thing in this book, and I wrote down yellow butterfly. And 48 hours, right? First 24 hours go by, nothing. And I did it at about 7 o'clock in the evening. And I used to train at 1 o'clock and finish about 6, right? Second day, forgot about it. Nothing's happened, you know. And then it gets to the end of the session, and there's a woman walking around the gym. I'm like, who's this woman? Like, what's going on? Like, never seen this woman before. She's just wandering around the gym, and the kind of director of the club at the time was like walking around. And I went, hey, Josh, who's that woman there walking around the gym? And he said, oh, she's interviewing for an office job. I went, all right, cool. Stretched out, got my stuff. I sat down. I was just about to put my trainers on and leave, and I looked at her, and I couldn't believe it. And she had a dress on, like a skirt, and it was covered in yellow butterflies. And it blew my mind. I was freaking out. I was like, what? I had goosebumps everywhere. And I was like, do you know what? That to me, that's all I need. Like, for the rest of my life.